you for joining us today. I call the January 28th meeting of Board of Adjustment to order. The first item on the agenda is to approve the minutes of the December 17th, 2024 Board of Adjustment meeting. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. The next item, 2A, is a variance request at 726 40th Street North, and Kim Satrowski will present.
Good morning. Item 2A is a request for a variance to allow a new primary structure to encroach in the required interior side setback. The subject property is 726 40th Street North, so just north of 7th Avenue and west of 40th Street. The property is zoned GI, General Industrial, which has a required interior side setback of 20 feet. The property owner is requesting a variance to encroach 10 feet into the setback. The applicant proposes a new primary structure for shop condos. As you know, the Land Development Code outlines a review process for variances, which includes 5 criteria, which all must be met for a variance to be granted. Upon review, it is noted that 2 criteria are not met. Criteria A states the requested variance arises from conditions that are unique to the subject property, that are not ordinarily found in the same zoning district, and that are not a result of the owner's intentional action. Staff notes that other neighboring properties are of a similar size and configuration, so this subject property is not unique to the zoning district, and the proposed building or site design could be modified to meet the dimensional standards. Criteria C states the strict application of the applicable standards will constitute an unnecessary physical hardship, not economic hardship, because the property cannot be used for an otherwise allowed use without coming into conflict with the applicable site development standards. Staff notes that the current building in use, a construction company, exists and can continue to exist, and building design options exist for the new construction to meet dimensional standards. The recommended motion to deny the variance request is included in your packet and up on the screen. The applicant is here if you have any questions. Thank you.
Are there any questions for staff?
Have there been any neighboring properties that had any comment?
No comments have been received.
I take it that the existing shop building towards the street is not in compliance, and when this rule was probably written after that building was built?
Right, so that building was built in 1940.
Oh, okay.
The area was platted in 1941 and annexed in 1977. So it
Okay.
was constructed prior to the current zoning regulations.
Do you know if a zoning change was evaluated to see if light industrial would be an option?
We did, and usually when we have zoning, we try not to have spot zoning. And I didn't do a thorough investigation of the property south of 7th Avenue North, but the property to the north was rezoned in the early 2000s. And at Planning Commission, it was recommended for denial for the zone change. And then City Commission changed that recommendation.
Okay.
So it was changed from what to what?
It was changed from general industrial to light industrial.
Okay.
And with general industrial would have been a different setback limit.
Right, so the light industrial is the 10-foot setback, which is being requested.
And that is the property to the north?
The spot up here where it's this little
Oh, the gray
light
one.
island,
Okay.
that would be the light industrial zoning. And again, as many of you know, we are just started to work on a process to update our land development code and zoning regulations. And so we also are putting extra thought and consideration when we do get zoning or entitlement questions at Planning Commission, just because we don't want to disrupt that process too much either. So there's lots of thoughtful consideration in regards to rezoning and other entitlement requests.
So is staff considering a revised setback for general industrial zoning?
Possibly through that community process, we will know more as that unfolds as to what the new zoning districts and regulations may look like.
So hypothetically, after the land development code is revised and implemented, it could be a different scenario than what we are looking at
Right,
today.
right,
But we don't know.
exactly. And it's the applicant's right as a property owner to proceed, and then your board's discretion to make a recommendation and make a decision.
Is there criteria that's considered in a general industrial setback versus light industrial? I mean, do you consider that fire risk is greater, or are there parameters that trigger a greater setback?
I believe so, and I feel like because this property, this building, this neighborhood was developed before the current zoning regulations, general industrial is more heavy industrial. It's like that most intense zoning district. And so oftentimes those are typically larger lots and typically more intense uses. And light industrial is the one right before you get to general commercial, so it has more flexibility in the breadth of uses that would be able to be there. This area right here, you know, to the west, there's the landfill and some aggregate uses. So the neighboring context is general industrial in nature.
So even though they may continue to be a light industrial, if they do a shop condo, the neighbors could be general industrial, which could cause or could be a hazard to themselves because they're that 10 feet closer.
I don't know if we know the prospective uses at this time to make
But
it.
we don't, but that's the rub, is because we can't tell the future, so we have to assume the worst.
Possibly.
Does the building on the site directly to the north, there's, looks like two buildings there, does the one further to the east also encroach on their setback? That looks closer than 20 feet. Was that also built prior to the new setbacks?
Correct.
And light industrial is only a 10-foot
Yes.
setback, okay.
Any other questions for staff?
If granted, would a conditional, basically the firewall would have to be beefed up to a higher fire standard, to a 2-hour or more? Would that be a conditional option?
There aren't conditions with this entitlement, but building code regulations would apply. So if a building regulation for the 10-foot setback, then it would be likely imposed, but we do have the building official here who could maybe clarify as well.
Yes, I'm Sean Radnick, the building official for the city of Fargo. There could be stipulations placed on the fire, or any walls or anything like that. They could have an increased fire resistance. You know, it could be 1 hour, it could be 2 hours, could be up to 3 hours, depending on what the occupancy is and what the building plans say. Reducing it to 10 feet, especially in a general commercial area like that, or a general industrial area and stuff like that, is something we don't like to see. We like to see the separation between the buildings because it creates a better, I guess, a better response for the fire department, and it creates a better response for the building itself, for safety matters and things like that. So there could be increased fire separations and stuff that are required within the building, as well as sprinkler systems and other things, depending on what it is, so.
Because it would be tough to put requirements. If you did go to the 10-foot setback and you gave requirements based on what was currently gonna be in the building, like shop condos. The problem with shop condos is you never know what operation's gonna take place in those shop condos, correct?
Yeah, that is correct.
There
We've
is
seen,
no regulation on what can or can't go into that building.
yeah, we've seen a variety of things going
Yeah.
on, auto shops, woodworking facilities, things like that, so. It's a crapshoot when it comes to shop condos. You never know what you're gonna get, so.
Any additional questions for staff? If not, does the applicant have any comments? And if you'd speak up at the podium and then introduce yourself, please.
Good morning. Thank you for having us. We've been in Fargo 12 years, and we do construction on the new construction, residential and commercial. The requirement for us to do the work is vans that have paint, primer for storage that cannot freeze. And it's a family company. We have 5 families depending on this company. And we have the primer van, the paint van, the material van, another texture van that needs to be stored through the winter. So most of this building will be used by our company for storage in the winter. We got materials that if they freeze, they get ruined, and it happens quite often. So it's important for our business, and I would say it's necessary to keep up with the industry. The other thing that limits us with the code is that we do need more base space. The normal standard for width is 60 feet. We're asking for 50, and we'll probably do with that, you know, if we get permission from the board that we approve the variant, and that would make it possible for us to get in and out and park in front of the base, and it would be a big blessing for our family, which includes 5 families. Thank you.
Could you state your name, please?
My name is Vern Ray.
Okay.
It's my son-in-laws and sons that we all run the company, so.
Okay, thank you.
Question for you. So the shop condo that you're proposing and the route in and out, you were saying you're running vans
Yeah,
for that. Have you looked at the turning radius to make sure you couldn't squeeze that to the south to make it work?
we have considered, but it's the wintertime storage that demands a little bit more space on the base.
Do you have I don't see an actual floor plan for the shop condo. Is that something that you've provided?
We plan to divide it into 5 shops. This is just a sketch of the foundation. We're not that far yet. We don't want to spend more money if it's not gonna work.
Could you pull up the cover page with the overall? Just looking at so you've got 38.5 feet for your drive aisle.
And in this picture, you can see the vans right now, and it's a problem every winter. you can see 4 vans in the front. And there's 2 vans in the back that need to be stored in the winter, and it's always a problem.
So you store the entire vehicle in there with the stuff?
Yeah,
I see.
yeah.
And the semi-trailers as well?
No, the semi are just the storage right now. They will be out of there.
If you had 15 feet setback and you lose another 5 feet out of your drive aisle, could you make it work?
We hadn't thought of that. We can probably make it work. That would be a good thing to consider.
One more question for staff would be, I know with the new land development code, we're trying to set it up so that by right you can do certain things without even, the code would say you could do this. Are we necessarily gonna go back into the areas that are already zoned and possibly rezone some of those areas with the new land development code?
That is a possibility, yes.
Okay. What would be, not to make you guess, these areas like this that are in a industrial area somewhat, what would be the possibility of changing that zoning from, because like you said, you don't like to mix light and general necessarily in one area. So you'd be forced to look at everything that's currently there to see if it could fall into a, say, a lower classification. I mean, is that a possibility? Or, I mean, the land development code isn't probably scheduled to be completed,
April of next year.
yeah. So to tell them to wait until April of next year because there's a high probability that this would get changed, is that, how would you see that possibly happening? I guess or is that a flip of the coin?
They're aware that that process is going on, and they've submitted this application to see if they can advance their project at this time.
Okay. Because we don't probably know how, okay. I'm just trying, all right.
Could I ask another general question of you? Are you storing water-based or oil-based, or a mixture of the two?
It's all water-based.
No other accelerants?
No.
Storage?
It's mainly joint compound, water-based primer from Sherwin-Williams. And the only reason that we can make it work is that we buy big totes. That way we can get a better price instead of a lot of bucket dealing. And so we have bigger machines that need to be protected.
Has the fire marshal or have they looked at this?
They have not, but again, you can look at what the existing general industrial standards are in this table. I mean, they have the option to design and site design and building design that could be anywhere outside of a 50-foot setback to the front, 20 feet on the north and south, and 20 feet to the rear. That is the developable window. And so there are lots of solutions that they can explore that would meet that.
Right. Part of me wants to see an actual turning radius study on this to see if you could make your current vehicle fleet work within it. But obviously, we wouldn't have that today, so it'd be hard to.
Yeah, Brian, have you done auto turn?
We haven't done an auto turn. I did have a conversation with Ryan Erickson about fire and access and things like that. I know that was mentioned a little bit earlier in the meeting on having access in there. And that's why we're showing that hammerhead there kind of between the two buildings is he did ask for that so that his vehicles could get in, make the reach with the hoses, and then easily back out of there and get out of there. But I mean, that is something we can show and explore is those turning radiuses. But I feel pretty confident that I think we're going to be with 38 feet I think we're gonna be fine with getting in and out of there.
I guess my question is, can you make it work with less after you run the auto turn?
Maybe. You know, some of the thought there was also to allow for some parking in front of the garages. So that's why we're showing that 18 and a half. And then a 20-foot wide drive lane, just so ease of access. If you do have to slip by, you can. So that's kind of why we're showing that. I think the other thing that's a little bit more unique in this, with the zoning itself, you know, with the 20-foot setback, you know, you're looking at 40% of the lot with the side yards that start to take it out of the buildable space or for a structure. So, I mean, the 10 feet helps with allowing them to get 50-foot deep bays, which is close to what most shop condos are, and then also just have ease of egress in and out of the all 5 of the bays.
Brian, could you introduce yourself? please?
Sorry, Brian Reinert's More Engineering.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant or public comment?
I guess I had just a quick observation. If we were to move the shop condos plan south and give you another, let's say, 10 feet on the backside or even 5 feet, could you do parallel parking staff parking off the property line?
Parallel them off the property line.
Yeah,
You could. I mean,
you're just taking that paving to one side to the other. It's gonna be
Yeah.
a little bit more work to dig it in, but you're doing
Yeah.
the work.
it's easier though, probably just to drive in, back out, and go versus trying to find a way out of there once you're paralleled in.
The thought of a 15-foot setback that you'd brought up, what does that do to your, that 18 and a half and that parking up by the building?
The drive lane would get pretty squeezed on that south side.
So I mean,
Yep.
essentially what you're saying is you want that 38 and a half feet on that side for maneuverability.
Correct. Yeah, just ease of access, just the way the site is currently laid out with the egress coming off of Seventh there, or not Seventh.
40th?
You know, it just off of 40th, but that's kind of why we would extend that apron a little bit there to the south as well, so we can get back there.
Your current layout has it closer to the east to the adjacent building, so that's roughly 20 feet. Would you entertain moving that to the west another 10 so that you increase that setback from the adjacent properties?
Oh,
So you have an adjacency to the north,
yep.
and that perpendicular line from the northeast corner of the building is the closest. I'm just wondering if we set that back another 10 feet to the west. So again, we increase our distance for, if there is any concern of flame spread, we can increase that even further.
We could. I mean, we're showing the building's 35 feet off that rear, so we've got 15 feet to work with.
Any other comments for the applicant,
No, ma'am.
the engineer? Okay. We're going to close the public hearing portion of it, and the board members, do you have any discussion?
Seems to me that we can't assume the future, you know.
Right.
One observation is that the lots are small. along 40th Street and between 6th and 7th Avenue. And I acknowledge that this lot is north of 7th Avenue, but a lot of those lots are similar size or quite narrow. I'm thinking the probability of a light industrial zoning being approved for these small lots is probably pretty realistic. And if we're considering going through some zoning change, I guess I would recommend that they try for a rezoning, and the Board of Adjustment then is not compromising setback standards or creating a unique situation for this property that would then serve as precedent for others, and it just gets muddy.
So can I ask the city another question? If this was prior to the land development code being reconsidered, would a PUD be an option to have this rezoned as light industrial effectively? Or like,
Again, like I had mentioned, we are maybe making sure entitlement processes that are reviewed at Planning Commission are scrutinized not to create unique circumstances that will make whatever the future application even more challenging to apply uniformly.
Sure.
I guess then our board is then the variable that could have changed this. If this would have been prior to this change, a PUD would have been an option. But now it's not because of this change, by no fault of the applicants of their own. So they've come to us to have a variable.
Not necessarily, because a PUD isn't a given as well. It would require, the way that is set up, it's kind of a give and get. Like they would be held to a higher standard to be allowed that extra flexibility that a planned unit development provides.
And what higher standard would that be?
Sometimes it's landscaping, sometimes it's building form. It's hard to generalize exactly how a planned unit development would be applied. And so that particular entitlement tool is to allow flexibility for a higher level of community benefit. Like the city is willing to maybe negotiate what the standards are with the promise that they'd be getting a higher level of design in exchange.
I don't know that we're terribly concerned about the higher level design in this current scenario. I think it's more
That's
of a,
why a planned unit development wasn't pursued at this
Sure.
time.
Any other comments amongst the board?
I guess I would be interested in entertaining an in between moving it to 15 feet off the property line and another, I don't know what kind of distance we can get to the back of the west side, but if we are within the 20 feet rear, entertaining that so that there is less likelihood of flame spread from either direction.
Do you want to entertain a motion based on the staff recommendation? And we could take a roll call, and or you could present a motion that includes some of the parameters that you're suggesting. I'm curious how we want to move forward. It takes 4 yes votes for it to be approved, and so I want to make sure that we have a clear path forward
Well,
in terms of the motion.
Sure. I guess I open up to discussion if that's something that anyone else would entertain too.
Well, and I'm wondering, I like the idea behind moving it to the west to increase that distance, but there's no way to say in the future what will be built on the site to the north, so that, you know, if all of that got torn down, then move So I think it has to maybe be more dependent upon what we're saying we would accept as that north setback. That's my only thought on that. Just like today, that would give an increased distance to the property to the north, but in the future, it still might not.
Sure, but today it's a better fire safety concern than in the future. In the future, we'll have to consider the property to the north
Yep.
if they're going to redevelop it.
Personally, I would not support compromising the setback. I feel like the applicant has a greater chance of approval for the 10-foot setback if we deny the request and they appeal to the city commission. Because there's a precedent that the city commission would approve a light industrial zoning, just like we see these spot zones within this area.
And they will implement a light industrial zoning.
Well, that would probably have to go through the city process, but.
Just one other clarification, with the 20-foot setback, and this is maybe a question for Sean, is there no special requirements for the sidewall construction then?
Again, depending on what the building design is like, there could be no
No special.
firewall required there. But moving it closer to that lot line is gonna put, more stipulations on that wall as well as any wall that's built in the future on the other lots. So you're gonna be putting more of a burden on the next owner of the next lot by moving this setback, so.
With even the rezoning to light industrial, does a 10-foot setback normally,
So the setbacks and stuff that we look at in the building codes, while there is stipulations and stuff within the zoning codes about what the setbacks are in zoning districts, our distances don't change depending on your zoning district of that particular city or municipality. So what we're looking at is even if they were to rezone it and take that down to a 10-foot thing, it's still gonna place the same burden through the building codes. So it's not gonna change the building codes any, it's still gonna have the same requirements, whether it was light industrial, heavy industrial, whether there was 20 feet, 25 foot, 4 feet. It's the zoning district and what, they're
Or would
looking
the
at.
light industrial require a fire separation wall?
It could. It
But
depends on the
that's
design.
the rub, is why we can't stipulate this
And
unless we
that's,
know.
that is the problem, is that if you're looking at this as an industrial lot at this point, that's the way we should be looking at it. There's no guaranteeing it's gonna change in the future, but as soon as you start moving things around and accommodating one lot like this, you could be putting an undue burden on the next lot as they come in. So you could have an industrial facility that comes in, buys 5 lots, combines them and makes a large facility there. And now all of a sudden, because this setback has been reduced, that lot has an undue burden placed on it, because now they have to start looking at what they're doing with their building, if they're gonna be too close to that other building that's there, because we look at building, between building setbacks, not setbacks from lot lines. So you could be looking at if there's a 10-foot reduction in this setback, and there's no longer 30 feet between the two buildings, or there's only 30 feet between the two buildings of the next building to the north, we're gonna be looking at some stipulations that have to be placed on that building because they might not be meeting certain requirements within the building codes, where the 40-foot might get them out of certain requirements and take that burden off of the next owner.
But is it true that burden's already there because of the existing building at the east end of this lot is already within 10 feet or less?
And it could very well be, but that burden was placed on there a long time ago, even before the building codes had these things written in them. As we look at them today, increasing a burden on somebody else because of new laws, new regulations and stuff, in my mind, is not a good way to do it.
Any further discussion amongst the board? Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to accept the findings of staff and deny the requested variance to allow a new primary structure to encroach into the required interior setback. in the GI General Industrial Zoning District on the basis that the review criteria of section 20-0914.e.1 A and C have not been met.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing no further discussion, Miranda, will you please call the roll?
Burine,
No.
Gunkelman,
Aye.
Polchinski,
No.
Orth,
Aye.
Wendell Dobb.
Aye. The motion has been carried. The variance has been denied. There's a 10-day window to appeal the decision of the Board of Adjustment, and Kim can explain kind of the process for that. Is there any other business? Hearing none, this meeting of the Board of Adjustment stands adjourned. Our next meeting will be February 25th. Thank you.